All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're unpacking one of the most game-changing parts of modern football, the set piece. We're going to break down a whole new way of looking at why some teams are absolute masters of the dead ball, while others just can't seem to make their practice pay off when it comes.
You know the feeling. It's that one moment that every single coach dreads. You've spent the entire week perfecting a corner routine. The signals are down, the runs are crisp, everyone knows their job. Then Saturday comes, you call the play, and poof, it just evaporates. That huge gap between what happens on the training ground and what happens in a packed stadium, that's exactly what we're going to solve today.
So, just how big of a deal are we talking about here? Well, this number, 0.67, tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Across all of Europe's top 5 leagues, that is the average expected goals, or XG, that teams generate from set pieces per match. Now, XG is basically a measure of how good your chances are. So a decent set-piece game is worth nearly 2/3 of a goal every single time you step on the pitch. That's massive.
And this chart just lays it out perfectly. You've got clubs like FC Barcelona at the very top, creating a staggering 0.82 XG. Then, way down at the other end, teams like Burnley, who are only managing 0.57. Now that gap, that 0.25 XG per game, might not sound like a world beater, but multiply that over a 38-game season, you are talking about a gigantic difference in your team's attacking power.
And this gets us to the core of the issue, what we're calling the set-piece gap. It's that incredibly frustrating feeling when what you practiced flawlessly on Wednesday looks like a total mess on Saturday. So, why? Why doesn't all that practice automatically make perfect? Well, it turns out the solution isn't just running the plays over and over and over again. The real secret is using a smarter framework. The best way to think about it is like a pipeline, a system that carries an idea from the whiteboard all the way to the back of the net.
And this pipeline is really built on 3 simple but powerful metrics. First up is transfer. How well does your training ground plan actually show up in a real game? Second, threat. How much danger are you actually creating? And third, recovery. What happens in those chaotic seconds right after the first ball is played?
Okay, let's break down that first stage. We call it SPTR, the set-piece transfer rate. It's a really simple concept, but it's so important. Basically, it asks, what percentage of the plays you practiced were actually run correctly on match day? And you can see the range here is pretty huge, from a low of 44% all the way up to a really solid 67%.
And when you look at the teams, a clear line gets drawn in the sand. On one side, you've got clubs like AC Milan and Arsenal. For them, about 2/3 of what they do in training you see on the pitch. It's reliable. But then look at the other side. Teams like Eintracht Frankfurt. Less than half of their rehearsed routines actually get executed properly. That's a huge leak in the pipeline.
So why does this happen? Why do these routines fail? Well, it usually comes down to 4 main reasons. First, you've just got the raw noise and pressure of a real match. Second, cognitive overload. Your players are already juggling a million other instructions. Third, the routine itself is just way too complicated. And finally, something called channel failure. If you're relying on a verbal shout in a stadium with 60,000 screaming fans, good luck.
So, let's say your routine does transfer successfully. The players run it correctly. What's next? Well, that's the second part of our pipeline, SPXG, or set-piece XG contribution. This metric basically asks, okay, you ran the play, but how much real danger did you create? This is where good execution turns into actual quantifiable threat.
And yeah, of course, a team like Barcelona is going to be at the top here. But the really critical insight is that this isn't just about having world-class players. A high SPXG shows you have a high-quality system. A brilliantly designed routine can manufacture great chances, even if you don't have superstars in the box.
And that brings us to the third, and honestly, the most overlooked part of the pipeline, ASR, or Activation Success Rate. The play doesn't end when the first ball is cleared. This metric tracks how often your team wins that crucial second ball. It's all about turning that moment of chaos into either a new attack for you or instantly killing a counterattack for them.
What's really interesting here is that it's not always the teams that press the most that are the best at this. You look at teams like Man City or Juventus, they win that second ball almost 90% of the time. It's not about chaotic energy. It's about disciplined, collective, and super efficient action the second that ball is loose.
So we have these 3 distinct stages, right? Transfer, threat, and recovery. How do we pull it all together to get one single grade for a team's set-piece performance?
Well, that's where something called the H5 score comes in.
The H5 score is actually really simple. You just multiply all three of those metrics together. It gives you a complete health report for your entire set-piece pipeline. And when you do that, you look at the top 3 teams and, okay, Barcelona, Inter, that makes sense. But Getafe? Wait, what are they doing at the top of this list?
And this, right here, leads us to the most mind-blowing insight of this entire system. We're calling it the Getafe secret. It's a perfect example of how a simple philosophy can let a team go toe-to-toe with the biggest financial powerhouses in the sport.
Which, begs the obvious question. How on earth does a team like Getafe, with their budget and their straightforward tactics, end up having one of the most effective set-piece attacks in all of Europe?
And here it is. The answer is beautiful. Getafe's secret weapon is simplicity. Because their overall team instructions are so clear and uncomplicated, the players have a very low cognitive load. There's just not that much for them to process, and that frees up so much mental space that they can execute a handful of simple set-piece routines almost perfectly, every time. They don't suffer from the mental overload that plagues more complex teams.
So this is all fascinating theory, but what about you? How can you actually apply this? We can turn this whole pipeline framework into a super practical 4-step audit that any coach at any level can use to start improving their team set pieces tomorrow.
Okay, you ready? Here's your 4-step plan. Step 1. Count your routines. Seriously, if you have more than 5, you have too many. Period. Cut them down. 2. Check your transfer. Are you actually executing over 60% of them correctly in games? If not, you need to simplify. 3. Measure your ASR. Start tracking how often you win the second ball. You should be aiming for more than 75% of the time. And finally, number 4, check your trigger channel. If you are yelling play calls from the sideline, just stop. You need to switch to nonverbal signals. It's a game changer.
Let's wrap it all up with the biggest takeaways here. Get really, really good at 3 routines before you even dream of adding a 4th one. Ditch the shouting and use nonverbal signals. It is the fastest way to boost your transfer rate. Start tracking who wins the second ball to see how healthy your recovery is. And never, ever forget the Getafe principle. A simple routine that's executed perfectly is always, always better than a complex one that's executed poorly. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about having a thick playbook with dozens of options. It's about having a few deadly effective routines that work like clockwork. Which leaves us with just one last question for you to think about. What is the first routine you are going to simplify?